Well, there's lots happening in the world of policy development, and especially around environmental policy and what is Canada's best path forward and how this impacts the agricultural industry. Joining us next is Al Mussell. He's a senior fellow with CAPI, also research lead at Agri-Food Economic Systems, based out of Guelph, Ontario. Al, great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be on, Sean.
Okay, Al, you got a paper out talking about how now this is interesting and just a slight twist here in the sense that your belief is that Canada, when it comes to climate change policy and the environmental file, needs to focus more on adaptation as opposed to mitigation. What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, so first of all, this is a conclusion I came to based on the work that I do rather than a particular belief. But so mitigation is the idea that that we can perhaps farm differently so that the emissions themselves will be reduced. Adaptation is focusing more on, well, look, the climate's going to change, and we are going to be subject to that in agriculture. We're vulnerable to it. So how do we change our practices or develop, assuming that that's going to happen, rather than trying to stop it from happening?
Yeah, okay. So I guess if we are going to, currently we seem to be more focused on the mitigation side. What are the consequences of doing that? Why is that why is that betting on the wrong horse, so to speak?
Well, it's the issue of if you're doing mitigation at the exclusion of adaptation, that's a problem. It's an issue of focus and one of limited resources, right? So and I go through a fair bit of data and evidence because I had to learn about this myself. I'm not a atmospheric scientist. So I had to learn about all this stuff, but it's a function of if you focus, you can't focus on everything, right? And as long as food is scarce in the world, which it is, and I think we need to keep really beating the drum on that because today's crop report, this week's futures market action, those kinds of things can obscure the fact that structurally over a period of time we have become scarce in food. Canada is one of the few countries that has significant surplus capacity to export, and as we can discuss here, it's pretty clear to me that Canada has actually benefited. Canadian agriculture specifically, is probably benefited by climate change. It doesn't make a lot of sense to turn around and impair that in some ways through mitigation. So for example, and these are voluntary measures, and I think that's important to recognize. But we have fertilizer targets. We've got targets around ruminants, grazing, etc. Again, voluntary. But look, it's people have said, agriculture is an important problem solver, and I believe that to the core. But what problems are we solving here? I mean, the problem that we can solve is that there's hungry people in the world, and we've got product to sell to them. If we take, we can solve other problems too, but then who's going to feed those people? And because that's a necessity, and it's a very important and urgent one, I think, Sean.
So give us some examples. What does adaptation, what does it look like? Like I understand, because I'm a little bit more familiar with mitigation, but is it can be as simple as maybe growing different crops than we're used to, or give us some examples.
Well, that's a simple one. So as with warming, there are crops that will work and will mature in some areas where historically they would have been marginal or highly risky from doing so. There's areas that will become amenable to cultivation that historically were, too cold, too wet, too this or that. That could actually become feasible for, and for some of us it'll be hard to imagine that, but that could happen. The literature tells us basically that as you get warming in the world, toward the extremes away from the equator, just as the crops will follow, the pests will follow too, right?
Is our commodity production system, our food production system, do you feel it's more resilient with an adaptation strategy over mitigation?
No, if I'm understanding it correctly, almost by definition, yes. Um, Look, mitigation. We're going to have to do mitigation as a country, as a global population. We're going to have to do that, but this is a long game. This is decades and decades, right? One of the points that I think is genuinely the case is, again, and there's I think a growing body of evidence out there that points us in this direction. We have to have enough food to eat to get to the point where we can see the efficacy of the mitigation, because, like I say, it's decades, and it's not just Canada. So Canada, I looked. Canada is about 1.5% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, and of course, agriculture is about, with heating fuels and grain drying and so on, is about 10%. So a 0.15. And I started to reflect on this, and I also went and by my calculations, when you look at staple agricultural products, so grains, oil seeds, meats, flour, not processed foods, just the staple ag products, we're about 5.5% of net exports in the world. Okay, so when we take our exports, subtract our imports out, divide that through by the total trade in the world, we're 5.5%. And that's needed. So, to what degree is it prudent to chip away at the 5.5% to try and mitigate when you're only 0.15% to begin with? And those are just some points I put together. I hadn't particularly seen that written anywhere else. And I'm worried that we're not on that track.
It seems like the track that we're on is there's all hands on deck trying to focus on the mitigation. And to be fair, they're not mutually exclusive either, though, are they? Like,
No, I think they're not. And I think one of the things that is kind of incumbent on us is let's look for the overlap. Like, where can we kill two birds with one stone, for sure? And we should be doing that.
and I would imagine, like when you say, hey, that Canada is an example of a geography, a country that, from an agriculture perspective, benefits potentially economically from some of the outcomes of climate change, or the changing climate, however you want to put that. I would imagine that there's some people that are going to give you major pushback on that kind of a statement. Taking a, I don't know if you're admitting defeat, but there's some people that this is a cause. This is
Yes.
this is a battle, right? And so it's an ideological, focus. So I imagine there's people that are going to have some pushback on that.
Yeah, I haven't had a Christmas card from Greta Thunberg, if that's what you're referring to.
Well, I didn't know I would.
Nor do I expect one. But it's maybe a bit of a nuanced point. Okay,
Yeah.
so this I don't think there's anything here that says, well, climate change isn't happening. Well, no, we have the evidence that it is. We shouldn't try to mitigate. No, we should try to mitigate. But we've seemed to have gotten ourselves into this position where it's a whole of economy thing. Everybody throw a shoulder to the wheel and do his or her part, almost like a civic responsibility. But hang on, these are, we're looking at different industries here, and like there's many industries that certainly contribute through their emissions to the problem of climate change, but are not particularly affected by it.
Right.
Ours is. Farming is by definition. And, as I go through the paper and document a little bit of the experience elsewhere in the world, if you're close to the equator, is this weighing in on ag productivity? And yes, it is. And it's adverse. And that's not unexpected because what they're getting is they're getting warmer and drier.
Mm.
So far, we're not. We're getting warmer and wetter. And
Yeah.
there'd be a lot of people who are going to say, well, I haven't felt the warmth either. Well, the warmth is overwhelmingly in the winter. First of all, it's not, if you will, in the growing season.
Yeah.
And it's mostly in the north, not in agricultural areas. However, what the literature tells us is that it's subtle, but it's been enough to extend the growing season, right? So, for example, a real nice paper I read from some Ag Canada research scientists looking at corn heat units in Western Canada. And corn heat units in Western Canada are actually up markedly. I'd have to go back and remind myself what the time period is. And it's very clear in their results. What this is just due to a lengthening growing season.
Yeah, I think also a part of that is that the adaptation includes like companies working on more drought tolerant varieties or hybrids.
Yes.
If you think about the fruit and vegetable industry, more cold tolerance when it comes, what we've seen happen to the cherry crop in the Okanagan Valley as an example. Those are adaptations, and if and things that growers need as to create resilience in the growing in the growing season is be able to overcome some of those peaks and valleys from temperature. That temperature is just one thing. There's a lot of variables that we face throughout.
There are. So you take we've had episodes here in the last 10 years where you get this crazy warm weather in the month of March all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And if you've got fruit trees and the buds start to burst, and then you turn around and get a freeze after that, well, you're done. That's your year. And actually with the grapevines or fruit trees, that you're done that year, and actually you have to worry about multi-year impairment in those shoots, and some of them die, right? So it's something that carries over a matter of years. There's other simple things that are affected by the climate, and we just take so many of these things for granted. Like, we run, so for example, this farm here, dairy farm, we figure on having a window of time that hay will dry in the field. And, that's well worn, and that speaks to your equipment, it speaks to your storage systems, etc. Well, what do you do when you start running into peak haying season and it rains every other day? It's nuts, and it's a lot of stress on people. And over time, people will they'll upgrade their machinery differently if that's the situation. You get into inoculants, you get into acids, you get into whatever you need to do to try and make this all work. But my point's not really the specific example, other than I think farmers, you tend to take a lot of things for granted, and when you have something that sideswipes you, like the evolution that we're experiencing here, like a lot of the basic assumptions that you farmed with your whole life, you have to call them into question.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, Al. Hey, Al, really appreciate you joining us here today on Real Ag Radio. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Sean.
We'll be right back.